In 2016, Oxford Dictionaries chose the word post-truth as its word of the year, during a time marked by Brexit debates and the US presidential election. They defined it as an adjective describing situations where objective facts matter less than appeals to emotion and personal belief. It wasn't just a new buzzword. It felt like a verdict on the modern age. Fake news flooded social media. Conspiracy theories went mainstream, and algorithm-driven echo chambers isolated people into alternate realities. Truth itself seemed to be losing its authority. How did we end up here? To find answers, we need to look back, decades back, at thinkers who warned us this could happen. Writers like George Orwell, political theorists like Hannah Arendt, and philosophers like Michel Foucault all saw pieces of this puzzle. Together, their insights reveal how power, media, and technology have slowly unraveled our shared sense of reality. In 1946, George Orwell wrote that political language was designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. He had watched totalitarian regimes in the 1930s and 40s weaponize language itself. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, understood that truth wasn't something you debated rationally. It was something you manufactured through constant repetition. Radio broadcasts, posters, newspapers. Reality became whatever the regime said it was. Orwell warned that when words lose their connection to reality, freedom itself is in danger. He imagined a world in his novel 1984 where governments could rewrite history, erase facts, even control thought itself. He warned that when words lose their connection to real facts, freedom is in danger. If you can convince people that war is peace and 2 + 2 = 5, you can control their minds. Orwell feared a future where speaking the truth would become a revolutionary act, because the truth itself would be so completely subverted. But a few years later, political philosopher Hannah Arendt described an even more disturbing scenario. What happens when people stop believing in truth at all? In The Origins of Totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt argued that the greatest threat wasn't just leaders lying. It was a society where the line between truth and falsehood completely collapses. Arendt observed how totalitarian regimes bombard people with so many lies, contradictions, and propaganda that eventually people no longer know what to believe. When every narrative feels uncertain or deceitful, people can become cynical and stop trusting anything. In this kind of vacuum of truth, Arendt warned, authoritarianism thrives. If citizens cease trying to discern truth, they become easy prey for demagogues who offer simple answers or scapegoats in the chaos. Arendt later wrote an essay, Truth and Politics, where she explained that healthy politics depends on a base of shared facts. We can have different opinions about those facts, but we need the facts as a common ground. If facts disintegrate, public debate becomes a theatre of pure spectacle, a fight of competing illusions with no reality underneath. She feared a world where politics becomes a battle of appearances and objective truth counts for nothing. In such a world, as she presciently noted, history can be rewritten overnight and lies don't need to be believed. They just need to create enough doubt that nobody knows what's real. This cynical collapse of reality was Arendt's worst nightmare, and unfortunately, it sounds eerily familiar today. If Orwell and Arendt mourned the collapse of truth, Michel Foucault analysed its machinery. Michel Foucault, writing in the 1970s, flipped the question of truth on its head. In works like Discipline and Punish and Essays in Power Knowledge, Foucault argued that truth isn't neutral or timeless. It's produced by societal institutions and power structures. Foucault says that each society has its regime of truth, a system of assumptions, media, and authorities that decide what counts as true. Schools, prisons, hospitals, governments, churches. These institutions don't just discover truth, they define it. They establish the norms for what is considered normal versus deviant, sane versus insane, acceptable knowledge versus heresy. But it's worth noting that Foucault was analysing specific historical contexts rather than claiming every institution everywhere always works this way. Every society, he said, has mechanisms to enforce its truths and silence or exclude whatever challenges them. For example, in the modern era, think about how the media works. A handful of powerful media corporations can effectively set the limits of public reality by choosing which stories to amplify and which to ignore. When a small group controls the flow of information, they wield immense power over what society regards as true or important. As analysts Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman argued in Manufacturing Consent, modern propaganda often doesn't work by outright censoring opposing views. It works by drowning them out. In other words, those in power manufacture consent by deciding which voices and facts get heard the loudest, until their version of reality is the only one most people ever encounter. Under Foucault's lens, truth is entwined with power. It's less about logical proofs and more about who gets to speak and what stories we accept. And if Orwell's blunt force Ministry of Truth has evolved into a more subtle form, it's one where media spectacle and expert institutions continuously produce a version of reality that serves certain interests. This sets the stage for what came next, the age of data and the engineering of belief. In the digital age, power found new tools to shape our perception of truth, big data, and personalized propaganda. A striking example was the Cambridge Analytica scandal. In 2018, it emerged that a political consulting firm had harvested the Facebook data of tens of millions of users without consent. Why? To create detailed psychological profiles of voters. Using those profiles, they micro-targeted people with tailored political ads and misinformation designed to trigger emotional reactions, fear, anger, tribal loyalty, rather than to present facts. Voters in the 2016 US election and the Brexit referendum, for instance, received thousands of variant ads and posts on their feeds, each customized to provoke an emotional reaction. If you were anxious about immigration, you'd see fabricated stories or exaggerated memes playing on that fear. If another person was upset about the economy, they'd see a different distorted message blaming some enemy. In this way, truth became something engineered and individualized. As one whistleblower put it, Cambridge Analytica turned Facebook into a political weapon, exploiting people's data to manufacture consent in a highly deceptive way. It's not only shady private firms. Governments have long practiced their own data-driven spin. Statistics that feel objective can be selectively presented or framed to tell a convenient story. For example, an administration might highlight a declining unemployment rate while quietly changing the definition of employment. Or it might cherry-pick economic indicators that suggest success while ignoring data showing rising inequality. As Foucault might say, power decides which numbers matter and what story they tell. We tend to trust numbers and graphs, but even those can be arranged to create an appearance of truth that masks underlying realities. By the late 20th century, truth was no longer just reported, it was crafted and marketed. But the biggest change came when information systems stopped just delivering news and started deciding what we see. Social media platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and X use complex algorithms designed to maximize our engagement. They learn what makes you personally click, pause, or share, and then they feed you more of that. The harsh truth is, what keeps people hooked is not careful nuance or accuracy. It's content that provokes a strong reaction. Outrage, fear, and affirmation of one's biases tend to generate the most engagement. So the algorithms flood your feed with posts and videos that keep you emotionally invested, which often means more extreme or polarizing content over time. The result is the infamous echo chamber. Each of us ends up living in a personalized reality online. Your social feed becomes a mirror of your beliefs. Two people in the same country, on the same platform, can receive utterly different versions of the world. For example, one person's feed might be filled with climate change denial and conspiracy theories, while their neighbor sees mostly cat videos and science news. Each thinks they're seeing what's happening, but both are really seeing what the algorithm thinks will glue their eyeballs to the screen. As this process continues, our shared factual baseline diminishes. We can't even agree on what the facts are because we're not shown the same facts. Philosopher Jean Baudrillard coined a term for this kind of condition: hyperreality. In a hyperreal world, simulations, images, media narratives, online personas don't just distort reality, they replace it. Reality becomes a collage of viral images, trending topics, and tailored feeds, to the point that the boundary between what's real and what's manufactured blurs out. In Myanmar, a far more devastating example unfolded. Social media, Facebook in particular, became a conduit for hatred and lies that spilled into real-world violence. UN investigators found that Facebook played a determining role in spreading hate speech against the Rohingya Muslim minority. For years, Myanmar's military and ultra-nationalists pumped poisonous fake stories and dehumanizing propaganda into Facebook feeds. Conspiracy theories accusing the Rohingya of terrible crimes, fabricated images and rumors inciting fear and anger. These went viral in a country where Facebook was practically synonymous with the internet. The result was beyond disturbing. A wave of atrocities that the UN later labelled a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Untruths on a screen contributed to mobs with machetes in villages. Reality itself, people's perception of their neighbours, had been weaponized by those in power to justify genocide. Orwell feared lies. Arendt feared cynicism. Foucault showed us how power manufactures reality. So what comes next? Some argue we must rebuild trust in institutions, journalism, and science, places where facts can be verified and shared. Without some common ground, democracy itself begins to collapse. But others, influenced by postmodern thinkers, argue the dream of one universal truth was always an illusion. Throughout history, one group's truth often meant another group's suppression. From this perspective, perhaps the goal isn't returning to a single tidy narrative, but rather building systems where multiple perspectives can clash openly without descending into chaos. Let me know in the comments your opinion. The problem is that when truth loses its authority, power takes its place. And history shows how dangerous that can be. Orwell once wrote, "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." It sounds wise, empowering, Orwellian. The perfect way to end a video like this. There's just one problem. Orwell never said it. It's fake. But it gets repeated in books, articles, speeches, because it feels true. And that's the point. In a world where anything that sounds right can spread without question, even a fake Orwell quote about universal deceit can become universal. If you found value in this video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And join us on our journey of discovering ourselves, the world around us, and the greatest minds and ideas. Thank you very much for watching.